Hi guys and welcome to Dial It Up, and today we're going to be talking about the twin rule of durations and how it interacts with can't use and lost and basically what it's all about. So first off, I wanted to start this episode with a bit of an apology. It's been 2 months since I told you guys that I was going to be redoing Dial It Up under the new rules, and I was supposed to have a lot more content out, like 8 episodes worth, and I haven't. Part of that was because I originally was dead set on having tutorials for you guys of how to use all of the standard powers under the new rules. Basically, I took too long doing it. Someone else did it and they did it better, so I'm actually just not going to do it now and go back to what Dial It Up has always been, and that is letting you guys know how all of the complicated and more intricate rules of the game work under the new rules. I've had to kind of come to the acceptance that with the new rule set, I'm not as knowledgeable as I used to be, so I've kind of taken the last 2 months to study up on the new rules and get a hang on what's going on in the game and how things interact, especially in-game once it's actually being played, and kind of getting a handle on all of the new wording and realizing what of the new wording is the same as it used to be and what is actually new, and what's just not a different way of saying things. Because there was a lot of things that came up and it works the same way that it always worked, but it's being said differently now, so that caused a lot of confusion early on. So just to let you guys know, I am back with Dial It Up. It's not going to be as frequent as it once was because we're still kind of figuring out the new rules, but also I want to just focus on the more complex, intricate rules than just the basic, hey, here's how to play Heroclix. We have a different show for that. Other people have shows for that. That's not what this show ever really was, and I don't know why I tried to make it that. So, with all that being said, I'm going to focus this episode today on specifically the twin rules of duration. Now, this is actually a rule that's always been in the game. It was just never specifically specified in the rulebook. It was something that just everybody kind of knew. It was something you learned through playing the game, or other players or judges or the rules forums, or however it is you picked up that knowledge. It was something that we always knew but didn't have the rulebook itself telling us, hey, this is what's happening. So I'm going to read you what it is and then basically explain it from there. So the twin rule of durations can be found on page 29 of the new 2017 rulebook. And it says, an effect with a duration is affected differently if it's lost versus can't be used. When an effect with a duration is lost, the duration expires immediately, and so the effect ends immediately. When an effect with a duration can't be used, the duration is suspended, but does not expire. The effect temporarily can't be used, but if the character later can use that effect again before its duration has naturally expired, the effect continues as if it had never been interrupted. So that's a lot of words that can be confusing if you don't understand what it's in reference to. So before we actually get into what that means, just going to tell you guys the difference between can't use and lost. These are all game terms that we used to use and still essentially does the same thing. Specifically lost. If a power is lost, it's no longer showing on the dial. You no longer have access to it. You're no longer equipped to the resource or the character or the object or whatever it is that you were getting that source of power from. So if you are no longer having access to that source of power, that power is considered lost. Now, can't use used to mean something slightly different, but now it's kind of all-encompassing with the fact that outwit is now a can't use effect. So instead of a power being countered, like outwit, or ignored, like pulse wave, we now have can't use. So they've taken away counter, they've taken away ignore, and everything is under the can't use bubble. So if a power can't be used, it can't be reactivated, any effects that had been going on previously are suspended. So the power is still on the dial, it's still something that you have access to, it's still an equipment, still a resource, still a power coming from another character, whatever your source of that power, that still exists, but another character says you can't use that. So an easier way to kind of hit that in the head is, okay, so you have charge on your dial, but that charge is now being outwitted. You can't use it. So that's pretty simple, but there are certain things that they say in the rulebook, and I'll just read that out for you guys. Can't use and lost. Two distinct but related things can happen to stop effects from being used, being lost, and can't be used. The difference between them are most important when it comes to effects with durations. Stopping effects. Power or abilities that are lost or can't be used can't be activated with an action, have any effects trigger, have their passive effects applied, and if that power or ability doesn't have a duration, all effects of that power or ability immediately end. When a power or ability is lost or can't be used, any currently resolving actions or triggered effects resolve normally. So that's just kind of giving you a heads up. It's basically what I just said, but in less words. Yeah. But yeah, so you have the difference between can't use and lost, and under both of those, effects won't trigger, you can't reactivate, you can't use an action to use that effect, so on and so forth. So, what does the twin rule of duration mean? So, in a very sort of specific example of this, the most common you'll come up against is perplex and outwit. So, perplex is a modifier. I say I perplex out my defense. Now, on your turn, you say you can't use perplex. That is your outwit. Now, because outwit is a can't use effect, it's going to suspend the duration of perplex. Perplex lasts until your next turn. So, say at some point in this action, the character takes damage from mystics or any other effect that's going to cause it pushing, that's going to cause it to take damage, and now outwit is no longer showing on their dial. So now that the outwit, the can't use, is gone, the perplex is actually going to come back because its duration was suspended rather than being completely out of the way. So you don't have to re-perplex. It's as soon as that outwit is gone, oh, okay, I have use of my perplex again. The effect of the perplex is still in place. So previously in the older rules, we had can't use being used pretty prevalently with the Orange Battery and with Nick Fury. Now their can't use was a little bit different than outwit in saying that you can't activate that effect again, but any sort of effects that were already in place aren't really going away. So that's actually all been kind of smushed together with the counter and saying that now that we have all of this together, we're going to use it, take a little bit from this, a little bit from here, and now this is how this works. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up with that, as I've already talked about the perplex and outwit, is anytime that you have an effect that puts down markers, like say smoke cloud or barrier, those markers aren't gonna go away if someone says you can't use smoke cloud or barrier. You can't reactivate it, but if there's already markers in place, those aren't gonna come down. Now that's something that kind of carried over from like the Orange Battery or Nick Fury, as those were always stayed up. But previously, when you countered someone's smoke cloud or barrier, those markers came down. Now, to address this, they actually flat out put it in the rulebook this time that the markers aren't going to go anywhere. So this can be found under the can't use and lost heading and the stopping effects. Tokens given to Heroclix characters or markers placed on the map are not normally removed when the effect that placed them is lost or can't be used, or if the character goes off the map. This is new. This is something they added in new because before, if you clicked off of smoke cloud or barrier, that would go away. Or if, like I said, if it was countered by outwit, those markers would go away. So now they're just going to make it simple. Those markers are there until their duration ends. Now, I mentioned with perplex and outwit, but that's not the only case of a twin duration. It's just at any point, if you have something with a duration that says until next turn, until your opponent's next turn, till the end of your turn, whatever that duration is, if you had a can't use power used against that, and that can't use power goes away, then that duration, as long as it hasn't naturally expired, so you haven't reached the end of your turn or the end of your next turn or the beginning of your opponent's turn, whatever your duration was, as long as you haven't reached that part, any effects, like modifications of that effect, is going to come back. So like I said, this is something that has actually always been in the game, but now we have it solid in the rulebook, and it sounds complicated when you're not given a full out game example on it, but when you start thinking about what it means in relation to the game, it's a lot easier to keep in mind what that actually means. But if you guys do have any comments, questions, or concerns, just let me know down below, and we'll see you next time for another episode of Dial It Up.